Hey there, welcome to TGM's Legal Nuggets, where knowledge meets inspiration. If you're looking for insightful content that informs, empowers, and transforms, this is the place to be. Don't miss out. Hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications. Join the community and let us grow together. See you inside. Welcome again to another insightful edition of TGM's Legal Nuggets. Today, as always, we want to take a look at a very significant issue. Now, this issue is very significant politically and legally for the Nigerian Legislative Chamber and particularly the Nigerian Senate. Now, what is this topic we want to take a look at? We want to take a look at the legal and national implications of Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan's sexual harassment allegations against Senate President Godswill Akpabio. Now, this issue has been trending and it's been causing a whole lot of ruckus and social media frenzy. Now, the recent sexual harassment allegation leveled by Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan against Senate President Godswill Akpabio, has really sparked a lot of, nationwide debates. People are talking about it in social media, conventional media, and so on and so forth. However, while the Senate has rejected a petition, the allegations raised are very critical, such that we need to consider them legally, politically, socially, and economically because they have implications for Nigeria. Of course, we all know that Senator Natasha, put a petition before the House against the Senate president, and that petition was rejected by the House, and as a result of that, she was suspended for 6 months. So now let us consider some of the allegations that Senator Natasha actually laid against the Senate president. Now, Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, who represents Kogi Central, accused, number one, the Senate president of sexual harassment. Now, this is a very serious allegation. Then number two, abuse of office, that the Senate president is using his office as against the mandate that he was given by his people and by other senators in the House. Then malicious obstruction of her legislative duties. Now remember, Senator Natasha has said that she actually brought up an issue with respect to the steel company at Ajaokuta. And as a result of that, the Senate president has done everything within his whims and caprices to frustrate, her move to investigate the corruption, the deep corruption that is going on there. So basically, those were the three allegations that were raised by Senator Natasha against the Senate president. However, we need to ask certain questions. We need to definitely ask certain questions. What are some of these questions? I'll list them now. Number one, does rejecting the petition mean that the case is over? Because I know quite a lot of Nigerians would want to know if it ends there. Of course, before Senator Natasha left the House on the day she was suspended, she said that injustice, in her words, will not be sustained. So definitely she might probably want to take some other actions or legal steps, aside what happened on the floor of the House. Then number two, what legal options remain for the senator? What are some of the legal options she can take? Number three, what are the implications for Akpabio's political future? Is Akpabio's political future secured for the fact that he has actually gotten his way now, in quotes, allegedly? Do you think his future politically is secured? Then, last of all, how does this affect Nigeria's stance on sexual harassment and accountability? Because whatsoever that went on the floor on that particular day, would go a long way to speak, how Nigerians would react to such an issue, and would tell the international community how Nigerians would act ordinarily to such an issue, particularly when it concerns those who are at the ends of political affairs in the country. Okay, now let's do an analysis of the legal, political, and socio-economic ramifications of this case. Now, first of all, let us take a look at the legal implication. What are some of the legal implications for Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan? Number one, allegation, if true, could trigger legal consequences for the Senate president under Nigeria's law, right? It could trigger serious legal consequences. And what are some of those legal consequences? Number one, under the criminal code, the Senate president could be tried for sexual harassment. The Senate president does not have immunity like the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So it means that he could face criminal and civil, suits if instituted against him. Then again, under the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, we also have the criminalization of sexual harassment and abuse of office. So these are serious infractions coming. That is, however, if Senator Natasha can actually bring out evidence and to prove her case, eventually. Then in terms of fundamental rights action, she can actually bring up fundamental rights action to state that the dignity of a human person has been infringed upon by the Senate, president. So if she decides to pursue legal action outside the Senate, she may file a civil lawsuit or lodge a criminal complaint with the law enforcement. So in essence, that's what we're saying, because she has actually taken a step within the floor of the House and it has failed. She put up a petition. Unfortunately for her, procedurally, she did not go about, the petition very well. And as a result of that, it was rejected. So nothing could come out. Consequently, she was, she was suspended for 6 months. Now, what are some of the legal implications for the Senate president, that is Senator Godswill Akpabio? If found guilty in law, is going to face serious legal consequences, including potential removal from office. That could be like the end of his political career. It's going to be a dent on his image. Then a civil lawsuit could be brought, against him, where he's going to pay heavily in terms of monetary damage to Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan Natasha. Now, if the allegations remain unresolved, they could impact his credibility and future political ambition, because definitely opposition would use it against him to say that he has a very bad reputation, and they'll begin to dig out, his past, if there is any in quote that doesn't augur well with the political stance and our nascent democracy. Now, for the Nigerian Senate, what would be the implication? Now, the rejection of the petition on the ground of procedural lapses, of course, raises questions about the Senate's commitment to justice and due process. Due process was not actually followed. So this raises a very big problem. Then again, it sets a dangerous precedent where allegations of misconduct may not be taken seriously at all at the highest level of government. If the allegation could be swept under the carpet on the ground of not following the proper procedure, it raises, serious concerns, particularly in the international community. And of course, nobody would have confidence on the Senate to tackle any issues. And as a result of this, other female member of the Senate who may probably be going through such allegations or such infractions rather may not be bold to come out, to state their claim. Now, that being said about the legal implication, what are some of the political implications for the Nigerian government? Now, this particular case tests the Nigeria's government's commitment to gender justice and accountability. It is so disheartening that on the floor of the House, there was no one single female senator who could stand behind Senator Natasha. So she was actually left on her own. We do not know why they were silent, but it doesn't speak well politically in terms of gender justice and accountability for female senators in Nigeria. If the government fails to take decisive action, it could erode public trust in democratic institutions. Now, the government has actually failed because the government is not even saying anything about it. So, if the government fails to take decisive action, people would no longer have trust in our democratic institutions. The opposition, of course, would capitalize on the controversy to demand stricter anti-harassment policies in government. Be rest assured, the PDP in Nigeria would definitely capitalize on this issue and then, try to up their games and to convince Nigerians otherwise. Now, let us talk about Senator Akpabio's political future. Now, even if the case does not go to court, it tarnishes his reputation. Of course, it is already a dent on his reputation and could affect his leadership of the Senate. Don't be surprised that in the nearest future, people may bring up this issue again to want to kick against him. In fact, by the time another election is conducted, say in 2027, if I'm not mistaken, yes, and he intends to vie for the Senate president for a second term, that might actually affect, his political career and future. So there's already a dent on his image. His political rivals may use the allegation to weaken his influence ahead of future election. Of course, I've stated that before. Then what about women in politics? Is there any downside to all these that are going on for women in politics? Of course, there are. Now, the case highlights challenges that women face in a male-dominated political space. In fact, I am not sure the number of female senators on the floor of the Senate, I'm not sure they should be up to 5. So, of course, you see, it is a male-dominated space and women face a whole lot of challenge. And because of their numbers, sometimes most of them may not be bold enough to want to speak up. Now, if Senator Natasha faces backlash, of course, she's already facing backlash. Now, if she, however, faces from, let's say there's a political statement made by the government or generally on social media and conventional media, it could discourage other women from speaking out against sexual harassment. Of course, I've highlighted this point before, just re-emphasizing so that we know the implication. On the other hand, if the case gains traction, it may inspire legal reforms to better protect women in politics. Women in politics needs to be protected. And then, what are some of the economic implications? For Nigeria's business and investment climate, there are serious implications with respect to what is going on at the floor of the Senate. Now, cases of sexual harassment at high levels of government damage Nigeria's global reputation. No doubt about that, because the international community is actually watching. Now, international investors may hesitate to do business in a country where gender-based violence is not adequately addressed. Because obviously, from all indication now, the allegations that were leveled by Senator Natasha against the Senate president have been swept under the carpet and nothing serious done about it. In fact, we have a case where the accused is now a judge in his own case. And that contravenes one of the major pillars of justice. Nemo judex in casa sua. You cannot be a judge in your own case. And that is one of the major pillars of justice everywhere or anywhere in the world. Now, Nigeria's ranking on the Global Gender Gap Index could affect foreign aid and grants for women empowerment. And That means our gender gap index, what's it called? The global gender gap index could suffer greatly because of what is going on. Now, aside the floor of the Senate, what about women in other workplaces, in the workforce generally? Because as it stands now, women are, getting into the workspace, unlike back in the days when men worked. So women are coming into the workspace now. So what are some of the implications for them? This case sends a strong signal about workplace harassment in Nigeria. A whole lot of women and female are going through sexual harassment in their workplaces. A whole lot. And most of them do not come out to speak. And if such an allegation are the ends of affairs of the Senate could be swept under the carpet, then you can actually imagine what would happen to those at the lower rung of the ladder. Now, if handled properly, it could encourage more robust workplace protection against sexual misconduct. Of course, it would help to put male folks who are very quick to sexually harass their female colleagues and juniors in the office, to put themselves under check. However, if this is ignored, it may reinforce a culture of silence, making it harder for women to speak out. And that is what the Nigerian society and the world at large would not want. Now, are there social and cultural implications with reference to, what is going on now? Of course, there are. Now, this case has actually sparked heated debates on social media, like I said before, revealing deep divides on gender and power in Nigeria. Of course, definitely a whole lot of people are commenting on this issue, and they've actually made several serious points with respect to what is going on. Now, some see Natasha's claim as a bold stand for justice, while others view it as a politically motivated move. Well, we can't say, we're just making up our own arguments here. Now, regardless of whatsoever view or stance you will be taking, the issue forces Nigerians to confront the prevalence of sexual harassment and how to hold public officials accountable. So quickly, let us talk about, or let us quickly take a look at the legal aspect of this particular discourse. Of course, the question that would bother the minds of everyone is, how was Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan supposed to prove these allegations against the Senate president? In Nigerian law, proving sexual harassment, abuse of office, and malicious obstruction of legislative duties require credible evidence. Definitely, there needs to be credible evidence and compliance with procedural rules. There are procedures that one has to go through for him or her to be able to prove these allegations. So let us take a look at some of the steps that she has to take for her to prove these allegations against the Senate president. Now, for sexual harassment, the laws that regulate this, of course, we've said before, the criminal code in the south, the penal code in the north. We've mentioned all this in some of our previous videos. And then we also have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, the VAP, and then the law in relevant state. But in this case, it's going to be the act, which is operative in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Now, what are some of the things that needs to be proved? What are the ingredients that needs to be proved? If you want to convict a person for the offense of sexual harassment, you must be able to prove the following. Number one, you must say, or you must prove that there was an unwelcome sexual advance. That is, an advance towards you as a woman or as a man that was not consented to or welcomed by you. This could be a request, it could be the person's conduct, and so on and so forth. So you must be able to prove this. Now, like I said before, it could be that the person made a verbal remark, a physical contact, or gesture. You understand? Then, secondly, you must be able to prove that the invite, the advance made by the person, this gesture, the remark, or the physical contact made by that person was of a sexual nature. You need to prove that. Mere rudeness or intimidation does not qualify. It must be a sexual advancement, towards you. Then number three, the accused person now, in this case, the Senate president must have intended to intimidate or pressure the victim. So if there are credible evidence is to show that that is in quote now, the Senate president actually tried to intimidate or put certain pressure on Senator Natasha, then she has to come out with credible evidence to prove all that, to show that it was actually done. Now, intent can be inferred from repeated attempts, threats, or abuse of power. So what we're saying is that it should be an not just a singular occurrence. It must be something that has been going on over a period of time, such that you can actually show repeatedly that the person made certain attempts, threats or abuse of such privilege or power. Then last of all, the act caused distress or had consequences on the victim's dignity, employment, or function. The act, that is that advancement that we talked about now, it actually had, some consequences on the victim's dignity, employment, or function. That is, it affected the victim's employment, the function, or the dignity of the person, of the victim. Now, these are certain things or ingredients that needs to be proved by the victim if you must prove a case of sexual harassment. Now, obviously, we've seen testimonies of Senator Natasha, on conventional media where she granted an interview, and then if she has maybe trace of text messages, emails, phone call recordings showing such things, they could also be used. Then also, if we have video or audio recording, if we have eyewitness testimony, people who actually saw these advances, they can actually come out, to want to speak about it. Then experts' psychological reports. Of course, you could go to an expert to get a psychological report to see how these advances has actually affected you psychologically. So now, these are some of the ingredients or some of the steps that the Senator Natasha has to take for her to be able to adequately prove her case. Now, if it is a criminal offense, you need to prove it beyond reasonable doubt, although not beyond all shadow of that. You just need to show credible evidences. Now, what about abuse of power? Abuse of power. Now, we have the Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Act. That's for public officers. The criminal code is there, the penal code is also there. That is, we're talking about abuse of power now. Then what must be proved for abuse of power? Now, for you to be able to prove an abuse of power or abuse of office, you must, number one, show that the person you are accusing held a public office at the time. You must be able to show that the person, as of the time you're making that allegation, held a public office as of that time. The offense applies only to government or public officials. So we must take that into consideration. There was an improper use of the official power or influence of that person. That is, the person occupying that particular position used his office improperly and not in line with laid down rules and regulations and the law. This includes using one's position to gain undue advantage or to harm another person. So if you can actually show that the person used it to gain an undue advantage and to harm. Now, in this instant case, Senator Natasha actually put a petition on the floor, and allegedly because of the influence of the Senate president, the petition was actually swept under the carpet. So this could be a very good ground for her to come under. Then number 3, the act was done corruptly, dishonestly, or in bad faith. Was not done to promote the public good, which the public official is supposed to protect. Now, if the person that is accused acted for personal benefit or to oppress a political rival, it qualifies as what? As an abuse of office or official position. Then last of all, number 4, the abuse resulted in harm, loss, or unfair advantage. The abuse resulted in harm, loss, or unfair advantage. Now, there must be evidence that the accused person's actions caused harm to the victim or unlawfully benefited the accused person. Now, in this case, how do we prove that? With the step that Senator Natasha actually took was a very good step, because by virtue of a suspension from the Senate, she has been deprived of all privileges that are supposed to accrue to her. So eventually, because it is already on record, if she goes to court, the court will begin to look at all these and will then begin to consider whether in fact the Senate president used his office at the detriment of the Senate, public image, and Senator Natasha. Now, what are some of the evidences that may be required? Of course, you need official documents like memos, letters, directives showing misuse of power. You also need correspondences like email, WhatsApp messages, call logs, proving improper instructions. Such trace could actually be helpful. You need witness testimonies from those who observed or were affected by the abuse. And now, if you could also bring, if in the event that there was a bank transaction or a financial record to that effect, you could also bring it forward. That would also help the case of the victim. Then audio or video recording can actually help to capture, these threats, coercion, the abuse of power, the undue influence, and so on and so forth. Now, since it is a criminal offense, you must prove it beyond reasonable doubt. You must prove it beyond reasonable doubt that, in fact, the person actually used it for his own benefit as against, the public good. Then last of all, malicious obstruction of legislative duties. Malicious obstruction of legislative duties. Now, what are the laws that regulate this? Of course, we have the Legislative House Powers and Privileges Act. The Senate and the House of Representatives are a creation of law in Nigeria. Then you have the Criminal Code, you have the Penal Code, they regulate this particular offense. Now, what needs to be proved? What are some of the things that needs to be proved if you want to prove malicious obstruction of legislative duties? The victim, you must show that the victim is a serving legislator. In this case, is Senator Natasha a serving legislator in the Nigerian Senate? The accused must have obstructed a senator. That is, the Senator Natasha has to show that the Senate president has actually obstructed her during the course of sitting, in the floor of the Senate. The accused deliberately interfered with the legislator's official duty. It must be shown that in this instant case now, that the Senate president actually deliberately interfered with the legislator's official duty, that is the legislative duty of Senator Natasha in this case. Of course, we already know that she came out to make an allegation with respect to frustrations with respect to the Ajaokuta Steel Company that was given by the, or done rather, by the Senate president. Now, number 3, the obstruction was done maliciously or for personal or political gain. Now, this is interesting. I actually think that Senator Natasha actually is on the right track. At least to some extent, I feel that she's actually on the right track. She actually, set a trap, and then the Senate president is walking into that trap. That is what I actually feel, because if you take a look at the events that have unfolded in the past weeks, you will see now that the ingredients that is needed to be proved are actually playing out before Nigerians. And if Senator Natasha can actually capitalize on this, she would eventually, get away at the end of the day. Now, what are some of the evidences that are required? Of course, legislative records showing disruption. She has to be able to show that there are legislative records that are showing, some of these infractions that she's talking about, videos or audio recordings of threats, intimidation, or removal from sessions. This would also help the court, to reach, a good decision with respect to the offense. Then eyewitness testimonies from people who are, from other lawmakers who were there when these things were going on, communications, messages, memos, WhatsApp chats, emails, and so on and so forth, proving the intent to obstruct. This can actually also go a long way to help our case. Then security camera footage showing forceful prevention. Now, although some of these things in Nigeria may not be easily gotten, but if all these things can actually be gotten by Senator Natasha, this would actually help her to prove her case. Again, the proof, the legal standard of proof here is beyond reasonable doubt. She needs to prove it beyond reasonable doubt that, in fact, these allegations are true. Now, what are some of the conclusions that we can make with respect to this case? What does this mean for Senator Natasha and the Senate President of Nigeria? If Senator Natasha Akpabio has credible evidence, she can still file a formal complaint in a criminal court or a civil action, outside the Senate. Of course, that is, the next course of action that I foresee she would want to, take with respect to the event that has been unfolding, for a while now. Then again, if Senate President Akpabio is found guilty of any of these offenses, he could face criminal penalties, removal from office, and reputational damage. Of course, we already know what's going on now. Then the Nigerian legal system will be under scrutiny regarding how it handles sexual harassment, abuse of office, and political obstruction of cases. Now, generally, legal advice to Nigerians: you must always learn to gather evidences. Always learn to gather evidences, because as of the time the events are unfolding, people and the courts are not there. So it is your evidence, the evidence that you have, that the court is going to rely on to want to judicially and judiciously, attend to your matter. So if you face workplace harassment, abuse of power, or political obstruction, document is everything. Then number 2, use legal channels. Your legal channel may be slow and may not make sense to a whole lot of people initially, but in the long run, it's going to come out well. So you always try to use legal channel. If internal complaints fail, explore civil and criminal litigation options. Then demand accountability. Be bold about it. be bold, be diplomatic, but be confident and focused on what you actually want. The law applies to everyone, regardless of position or power. Then, last of all, know your rights. Know your rights. Read and understand laws like the ones we've stated before: Violence Against Persons Act, Criminal Code, and every other relevant law in Nigeria. So now, what are our final thoughts with respect to this issue? Because definitely we've been trying our best to see how we can analyze this issue that is before us. We've said it before that you need to speak up. You need to speak up. Cases like this should ignite national conversations on power, gender, and justice. So we want to thank you if you've actually stayed up to this time. We want to really appreciate you for listening to our legal nuggets. So actually, the comment section is open, and we want everybody to go down there to give their opinion with respect to this issue. It is a national discourse, and it is not something that needs to be discussed in isolation. Now, should Senator Natasha pursue legal action outside the Senate? Do you think she should pursue legal action outside of the Senate? Drop your comments. We want to see what you actually think. Do you actually think she has a good case that is going to come out well at the end of the day? Drop your comment. We want to see it so that we can actually learn from your wealth of knowledge and experience. So we want to also say that you should like our video, comment, share our content, subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on the notification button on our YouTube channel and our social media, and let's keep the conversation going. Justice should not be selective, it must be for everybody. So see you on our next video where we discuss some other national important issues. Thank you and bye bye.